Welcome to Covered in Pet Hair, a boozy show for pet lovers on Pet Life Radio. I'm your host, Isabel Alvarez Arata, and today I have the pleasure to have a drink and a chat with the leading expert in separation anxiety in dogs for the second time. Welcome back to Covered in Pet Hair. I'm your host, Isabel Alvarez Arata, and today I have the pleasure of having a drink and a chat with a pet parent, a dog trainer, a published author, an entrepreneur, a founder. She's a primary educator for dog professionals. She's a foodie, a wine snob, and a world traveler. She loves the ocean and considers herself a recovering workaholic. She's originally from San Francisco, currently lives in the California wine country. She is the leading expert in separation anxiety in dogs. She is Malena DeMartini. Welcome back, Malena. It's so good to see you.
I just love you're so kind for all the words that you say, but yeah, I just love your smile, Isabel, and the fact that you're just as enthusiastic as I am. It makes me really like excited and joyful to talk to
I know
you.
any opportunity I have to check in with you, I take as a blessing because you are the leading expert in something that affects so many pet parents. And I feel like there's still so much work to be done because people don't know that they are a pet parent to somebody with separation anxiety. And my goal with these interviews is always to entertain and educate. And you are the perfect entertainer and educator because you're such an expert, but you're also so personable. So thank you for being my guest.
Thank you for having me. I love this, and I'm with you. I want to get more education and information out there because it's just amazing to me how we've grown in education and awareness, but not to the extent that we need to. So more and more and more people need to know that there are positive ways to work with separation anxiety, and more people need to know that it even exists.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So these people who might think they have bad behaving dogs, they may just be dogs that have separation anxiety, especially like we spoke last time. And for those who are tuning in for the first time to an interview with Malena DeMartini, you should check out our first interview, which we did 3 years ago. And it is a basic kind of intro to separation anxiety. We're going to check in on some of that information, and we're going to talk more about separation anxiety and how it affects different dogs in different stages of their life and different moments or experiences that they might go through. So before we get into all that, I want to introduce our drinking game today. So anybody participating in our drinking game at home, anytime you hear this word, take a drink of whatever you're enjoying, but please be over 21 in the US to partake. Never drink and drive, and always drink responsibly. So what are you joining us with from the California wine country?
Well, it's not wine today, as a matter of fact. What I'm joining you with is called a separation anxiety soother spritz.
Ooh, I love that. What's in a separation anxiety soother spritz so that I can enjoy one when I feel separation anxiety?
Well, there you go. Separation anxiety soother spritz is only for dog guardians, not for dogs, just so you know. This
yes,
is not
of course.
Your dog, for sure. But this is a splash of Campari, a splash of soda, and a bunch of mandarin juice and peel from my garden.
Ooh, so beautiful. Ugh, I love that so much. It sounds amazing. And honestly, I say that the people who deal with real separation anxiety at home, they need a soother because dogs with separation anxiety can be a lot to handle. So I totally agree. That's for humans only. And I'm actually joining you with a similar drink. It is orange. Yeah, it is orange too. It's a mimosa, classic mimosa. I just felt right today. Cheers. Thank you so much for being my guest again. And I feel like we're having brunch or something now. In the future, we will. In real life. Okay, so I always introduce this show with a game, and today is no different. We're actually going to catch up on some of the facts that you shared last time we spoke. This game is called Separation Anxiety Catch Up. And so we're going to just ask you some questions that I remember from our conversation and see if anything has kind of changed. Are you ready to play?
I'm so ready to play.
Yay! Okay, so right now in 2024, approximately how many dogs? I think you said one out of a number last time. So if you have that kind of number this time, how many dogs are affected by separation anxiety?
You'll be surprised to know that percentage-wise, it's about the same as it was 3 years ago. And 3 years ago, if we think about timing-wise,
Yes.
many of us were like, oh no, the pandemic is gonna like chew up and spit out dogs in into their separation anxiety woes, right? Interestingly though, so that was about, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20% or more, going all the way up to close to 50%. Interestingly, we've had a lot more inquiries about dogs that are suffering with separation anxiety. But from a population level, it is about the same percentage. And I think there's several things that have influenced that. One is during the pandemic, everybody and their brother and neighbor and friend adopted a dog.
Right.
So from a population level, almost 50%, or a little more than 50% rather, of households in the US acquired a new animal during the pandemic. So just by virtue of population increase, we're getting more inquiries, right? I think there's a little bit more that has influenced this though, because everyone thought, oh my gosh, these dogs are not going to be left alone during the pandemic for, weeks, months, almost potentially years with what has happened. And everyone thought, oh gosh, they're going to all be suffering. But I think what actually has attributed to these increased numbers of inquiries has been that everyone now can either afford a standalone camera for $30 or $40, or they can just log into Zoom and watch their dog. So people were not necessarily, for no reason other than accessibility, we're not necessarily watching their dogs previously. And then they start to watch their dogs and they're like, oh, interesting. That behavior doesn't look very comfortable.
Right.
And I think one of the coolest things about that is that a lot, not all, not, huge percentage, but a lot of the inquiries we're getting now are, I just am watching my dog on, Zoom or on the camera, and he doesn't look comfortable. He's, kind of pacing, kind of whining. We never got those inquiries before because no one knew, no one noticed, no one saw it.
Yes. That's
So
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember when we spoke that you were recommending the cameras, and I recently did have to purchase a camera for unrelated to pet reason, but they are so much more affordable than they were even when we spoke 3 years ago.
Definitely. The main camera when we spoke, the mainstream camera service when we spoke 3 years ago was Nest Cam, or Drop Cam as it was called. And it was like a $200. I mean, it was not cheap for just to watch your dog kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Now, I mean, you can go on to any, go into any, big box store or any online, store, and like $30, you're good.
Yes, exactly. And for those who, I'll shout out to Wise, WYZE, because that's what I use in my grandmother's assisted living, and it's been super easy. If you want to record, you do need a little memory chip. Just know that, and that's a tip that I learned the hard way. I just was like assuming that it was already built in there, and that's why they are so affordable, because if you just want, to be able to check in whenever you want, you don't need to record. They're like $20-$30, and the chip I think was like $30 additional once I ordered it. So Wise, WYZE, is a great option and definitely more accessible. So has research also been continued since we spoke? Is there more research? What has the research found? I know you said that there could be a genetic link. Is there any more to indicate that that's the case?
There is some sort of burgeoning research. Genetic stuff is, I actually recently attended a conference about some of the genetic components of dog behavior. And the wonderful Dr. Palmer was talking about just research in general, and Dr. Lindsay Palmer, and was talking about research in general, and said that it takes, gosh, I hope I quote this correctly, it takes 10 to 12 years for the research to kind of get down to the people that are applying it, sort of thing.
Interesting.
And I was like, oh my gosh, and so I thought, there's a lot. I know and I scour the research all the time, but I suspect there's a lot out there that are in publications that I'm just not aware of,
Right.
or are in other countries, or other, are published in other languages.
Exactly.
So, there's a lot happening. From a genetic standpoint, I don't remember if we spoke about this, but what had been discovered, which is pretty cool, is that there was a haplotype, which, for lack of a better term, a genetic marker, right? That's a very simplified way of saying it, but that had been discovered that was associated with separation anxiety. Interestingly enough, the more I have read and understood about that, it's not at all a surprise. If you think about, I'm going to breed a dog that has fearful behavior of any sort of variety, the likelihood that the pups are going to have some sort of, maybe not all of them, but many, some or many of them will also have some fear behaviors.
Absolutely.
I think it's important though, and I hope I said this last time, but if I didn't, we're making it into this recording. Just because something might be genetically influenced does not mean that it's not modifiable.
Right. Exactly right. Absolutely. Has there been any breed specifically that's been identified as having separation anxiety in more cases than other breeds?
So there's a handful of studies that talk about, we did this breed specific research. So far, the jury is out, and I'm going to tell you why. There are some breed-specific research papers, and I read through them, and I think, oh my gosh, this exactly mirrors my experience from almost 20 years ago. And I'll give you an example. There's one that shows that Vizslas have a high propensity for separation anxiety or separation related behavior problems. But then when you look through it and you're like, oh, well, they're also based in Hungary. Mm-hmm. So that is the predominant breed, or, very popular breed there. So from a population standpoint, there's a lot more Vizslas there than there might be in, I don't know, Wichita, Kansas or something
exactly.
Like that. So the jury is still out. I think what we are starting to see is heritability when we're looking at lines of dogs seems to be fairly prominent. Mm-hmm. Cross breeds, not necessarily as much. So in other words, this mom and that dad have some sort of fear-based separation related behavior problems. Those pups in that lineage, in that line, may continue to show some of those behavior issues. But that doesn't mean another dog
Exactly.
breed that didn't have those problems would produce that. So still
out.
Still
Okay. And do you see it more often in purebreds versus rescues? Is it about the same? Is the jury still out?
Okay, from a research perspective, the jury is still out. I'm going to give you my personal experience, because I think it's important that we hear it. There's a lot of discussion about, well, obviously shelter dogs are, going to have more separation related behavior problems than purebred dogs. That is not, anecdotally anyway, from my experience, what we see in our practice. I mean, we have probably a similar amount of purebreds as we do, rescues and mixed breeds and things like that. So I commonly say that separation anxiety is sort of indiscriminate. Like, it's like, oh, you, and maybe you over there, and maybe you over here. It just, but we don't know enough to know. We know so much about what doesn't cause separation anxiety, but we know very little about what does. So
So that's my next question. What does not cause separation anxiety? Maybe like the top 3, maybe some surprises that some myth busting here.
Love it. This is one of my favorite topics, just so you know. The number one thing that I want anybody and everyone to hear, like, you can shut this podcast off if you have to go somewhere, but hear this one point. Just hang on for 1 second. Spoiling, quote unquote, activities are not only are they not really correlational, but they're not causational for separation anxiety. And so when you are a dog guardian and you recognize and realize that your dog has separation anxiety, the first thing that people will commonly do is talk to their friends and their colleagues and their family. And 99% of those folks, just making that number up, but it's true, are gonna say, if you just didn't spoil your dog so much, stop letting him sleep in your bed, stop giving him treats all the time and taking him everywhere with you, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, letting him on the couch, all the things. That has those, we're going to call them spoiling behaviors, but in my personal opinion, that's how you love a dog.
Exactly. That's just care.
Just care and kindness and love, right?
Yes.
And none of those correlate with separation anxiety. And that research actually started very long ago. One of the first really prominent pieces of research was in 1991 about it, and it's been replicated. And this is one of those things that's really important in research and in science in general, right? We can get this one-off paper that says, I found this cool thing. But until it's replicated, and then again replicated, and then again replicated, we don't know. But this research has been replicated many, many times since the early 90s. And nope, love your dog, kiss your dog, pet your dog, sleep with your dog in the bed, all the things, because that's not going to cause or even impact their anxiety.
Exactly right. I stumbled upon a video of a dog trainer. I don't know what their credentials were on social media. And it was that your pet, you're over spoiling your pet, and that's going to lead to you not being able to leave the house. And I made the mistake of commenting, being like, that is not how separation anxiety works. And so many people were like, I know for a fact. And I'm like, that's not what the science says, because I heard it from the leading expert in separation anxiety that does not cause separation anxiety. Loving, caring for, and feeling like your pet is part of your family does not cause separation anxiety. I love that you commented on that, and I love that we're going to be able to share that, diffuse that on social media, because there's so much misinformation about how we need to keep our pets down in order for them to be healthier and happier. Like it doesn't even make sense, like logically.
No, and as a matter of fact, a lot of the so-called, let's just say, trainers that are claiming these things often talk about the concern that the dog is hyper attached.
Right.
And what's interesting is that attachment theory started to become important back even like in the 50s, right? It started with Bowlby, and this was all about attachment, human child
Yes.
attached to not just parent but female parent. So it was very interesting. That attachment theory, there's so many holes to be poked there, but one of the things that I think is really important that people hear is that attachment, when it is a positive attachment, right, a supportive attachment, meaning they're getting everything that they need, that is correlated with fewer levels or lower levels of anxiety, as opposed to insecure attachment. And this
Yes.
is true in, human relationships too. Insecure attachment, where they're getting variable, like sometimes I hug you and love you, and sometimes I'm mad at you and I, smack you on the head or whatever.
Exactly right. And I'm an attachment parent for that reason, because from my understanding, the more their needs are met, the more independent they become when they are ready to do so. So I've always been, and I know my family thinks I spoil my kids and I'm always there for them. And, they're too attached to me. And I'm like, who else are they going to be attached to? They're 6 and 4 years old. They're supposed to be attached to their mom. And from a pet parent perspective, who's feeding the dog? Of course they're going to be attached to you. They can't open the door, drive to the grocery store and buy themselves kibble. You are their provider and their source of survival. So of course they're going to be attached to you. And it would be really unnatural for them not to be, knowing how our families function and how we feed them once or twice a day, how we provide for them every single thing that they need in their life. Makes no sense.
And it's real, and I'm gonna just follow up on that really quick, because one of the things that I learned, this was eons ago, but Jean Donaldson actually said this, and it always stuck in my head about like dominance type theory, right? Like, oh, they're trying to take over, and I always laughed at that, but I never really thought it through until Jean said to me, "How many dogs do you know that have stolen the car keys and the credit cards and have driven off to like spoil themselves in the pet store or whatever?"
Exactly.
Like, they can't. They are so, they need our care. They
Absolutely.
If they want to go potty, we take them out. I mean,
Exactly.
It's pretty succinct.
Exactly. It's so funny because I feel like we forget how much our pets really understand about our dynamic, because I think we don't give them enough credit, like they know who feeds them. They stare at you every morning. The person in the house who feeds them, they stare at you every morning. They want to be in your good graces. They're not trying to challenge you so that you can't have a hand to feed them. Are you crazy? Like, we have to give our pets a little more credit. Well, I have 2 more questions for the game. These are I feel like these are going to be helpful for those who don't know much about separation anxiety. When people call you, what is the most common symptom or sign that they're sharing with you that leads them to believe that it's separation anxiety?
Well, I'm gonna talk about the 3-headed dog, so Cerebus here, right? The most common 3 symptoms are vocalization when left alone, destruction when left alone, and elimination. So, urinating or defecating in the house only when left alone. You're right. This is really important for people to hear, because that is changing, as I kind of alluded to earlier, now that people have cameras to watch their dogs. those three, vocalization, elimination, and distraction, are three symptoms that are terribly inconvenient to the guardian.
Right.
You're getting landlord or neighbor complaints, you're having to clean up pee and poop, you're replacing doors or whatever. Those are really, they're big deals to us as a human component. But there are a lot more indicators of stress when left alone. Those are just the ones that really are obvious to us from we're not, even if we're not watching the camera, right? Right. And so to me, things like excessive panting, pacing, drooling, scratching, there's so many, even just freezing and pupillary dilation, like a dog that's like terrified and trembling, there's no inconvenience to the guardian or to the neighbors or to anybody, but that's a horrible way to spend 4 hours while someone's out at a movie or whatever it is, right?
Or 8 to 10 hours if they're at work. Oh no. And what have you seen any unusual signs that people would be really surprised to learn can be related to separation anxiety?
So I'm gonna say maybe this isn't unusual, but I will not commonly, but often enough get referrals from veterinarians saying this, the guardian says he doesn't like being left alone, but we want to talk because this dog has severe GI issues or severe skin allergy type things or that kind of stuff. And I'm not a vet, gotta say that across the board. I mean, of course I'm not saying that I know that these things are correlated from a medical standpoint, but so many of these dogs, I'll tell you this, when I was in corporate America, I was a stressed out mess. And I used to have a bottle, I'm not joking, a bottle of Pepto-Bismol in my desk drawer because I was constantly like, oh, I don't feel well. And I was just like slugging at that. Well, stress can and often does create gastrointestinal issues.
Absolutely.
Create skin irritation and all the things. Again, that obviously has to be discussed with and diagnosed by a vet, but it's not uncommon. And it's one of my favorite things is when we start to work on the dog's separation anxiety. And then suddenly you're like, oh, they have normal stool again. That's amazing. And you're like, oh, so it wasn't, so what comes first, the chicken or the egg? We kind of don't until we start to make some progress with the anxiety. But I think that's an important one to think about and to recognize. And it's one of the things we track very carefully when we're working with dogs, like what is their GI like? What are other aspects of their health looking like?
That is so important because I'm a big believer in knowing the root cause for ailments, right? And if we don't kind of know that maybe you go to the vet and you're telling your vet your dog has GI upset, but you forget to mention that you're also working with a dog trainer because of separation anxiety, that's really important information because maybe the vet will be educated enough to say like, hey, I know this person who may be, who's the leading expert, who may be a better resource than, a dog trainer who's not specializing in any way in separation anxiety, so that maybe it can come back to the root being not, a gut issue, not the food they're eating, not the medication for XYZ is causing stomach upset, but maybe it is just the stress levels are so high. And I think everybody has seen at some point a video of a dog having a huge reaction to, for example, noises. We've all seen the videos of the dog trying to get out of a crate or trying to escape his own home because fireworks are going off. But I think a lot of people haven't seen, these subtle yet really telltale signs of a dog with separation anxiety. And like, sometimes they're so subtle because my dog has separation anxiety. It's better when she has a pet mate She does not do well individually at all. And it's very subtle with her. It's very kind of like that very excited return from the store. She's just jumping out of her skin after an hour. 10 minutes out front, she's fine. An hour more, she just is just jubilant that I'm back. So these kinds of things people don't realize could be a sign of separation anxiety. You just take it as a compliment. Your dog's happy to see you, but you don't know that they have been desperate for you to come back. Again, because they know that you are their source of survival. So thank you so much for catching us up on that. I want to catch me up on your business and everything that you guys are doing. I want to shout out to you and your team for supporting the Texas Pet Sitters Conference. You're always so generous with us, sharing with us your Mission Possible course, your books. So what do you have going on right now other than everything you've always done, which is your books, your courses, and being basically the leading trainer for dog trainers that want to specialize in separation anxiety?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because one thing I do want to talk about that we've been working on for about the last year, I mean, it's a huge passion of mine. I mean, separation anxiety in general is my passion, but this piece has been a huge passion of mine for a long time. And that is how to support shelters and rescues that have separation anxiety dogs in their care. And there are big, big, big gaps in the elements of support and resources for shelters and rescues. We conducted a survey, started last year in October, and we've had quite a few responses from staff and volunteers and fosters and everybody associated with shelter and rescue. And we learned a lot. And what we learned is that there's a very large spectrum of, yeah, we follow up one time, 2 weeks later, and then they're on their, from
Yeah.
there to much more robust. And it was interesting because it was indiscriminate between really, really small shelters and rescues that only had 1 or 2 people, volunteers, kind of thing, to very large. There was a lot of gaps in that follow-up and how to support adopters, and even how to look at the point of intake through fostering, through pre-adoption, through post-adoption. And we've created a lot of resources for that. And I recently presented on this shelter and rescue topic for our research findings. Well, one of the things that I found interesting at the IAABC conference, I asked the audience, like, how much follow-up do you provide for dogs with known separation-related behavior problems once they're adopted? And it was an interactive poll, so they could just scan a QR code and then just anonymously type in their answers, and those answers showed up on my
Nice.
live screen, right? It was a little worrying because it was like none, very little, not anything, just some, not too much, one follow-up call, one email, one this and one that. And there were others that did more, but the overriding predominant answer was none or little to none. And
Wow.
we need to change that.
Yes,
And I think
of
the reason we need
course.
to change it, well, for many reasons, but you know, we do a tremendous job and my hats are off and I salute everybody in shelter and rescue. They do such wonderful work. And I know that, you get the dog into your organization that has, I don't know, an ACL tear or something like that. They're like, we're going to raise this much money
Yes.
to repair this ACL to get them out. And then we're going to follow up and we'll have vet visits and we'll have this stuff. separation anxiety is a behavioral emergency. Okay, it may not be medical in the sense that you can't operate on
Right.
it, but it is a behavioral emergency, and I think we need to give those dogs that same level of kindness, care, and support, and those adopters as well. So I'm hoping to start to educate and provide more resources that will allow people to adopt these dogs with the understanding and the hope that this can be addressed, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, what's really interesting is that as somebody who supports and advocates for rescue and obviously advocates for training, especially for situations like separation anxiety, I never thought about maybe people doing a fundraiser to get a dog trainer involved for a dog that is in a shelter environment that suffers from separation anxiety. It should have been low-hanging fruit and really obvious to me, but until you said it, I was not, it just hadn't occurred to me. So I think that's exactly why we have these conversations. That's exactly why people like you do what you do so that we can make this more of a approachable topic that has a solution rather than something that, well, I'm going to ask you that may actually destine the dog for the worst or for the unthinkable because they think that there's no solution. So on that note, I'm going to take a break right here. We're going to listen to our sponsors. And when we come back, I'm actually going to dig in deeper into separation anxiety, rescues and shelters, what they do, what they don't do, what it means for the dog. So don't go anywhere. We will be right back with Malena DeMartini. Welcome back to Covered in Pet Hair. I'm your host, Isabel Alvarez Arata, and today I'm having a conversation with the foremost expert in separation anxiety in dogs. That is Malena DeMartini. If you know anything about dog training, if you know anything about separation anxiety, you know Malena, and you know that she is just as knowledgeable as she is committed and dedicated to this topic. I love having you on the show, Malena, because I learned so much, and it really does get me thinking about something that is very akin to mental health, right? So we talk about mental health as an actual medical condition in humans, and this is something that is very similar, and many times in the pet world it doesn't get its due. So we were just talking about how you are committed to helping rescues and shelters navigate separation anxiety from the start through adoption and beyond. And I want to play a game with you, and this is called Mission Possible Rescues and Shelters, to take from your course's name. And I just want you to tell me how you and your team help in these specific moments and things that maybe adopters should be looking out for, asking for if they, if they think that they might be working with a rescue that's open to it. So the first question I have for you is, how do you help shelters and rescues at intake? And intake, for those who aren't familiar with the terminology, is when they receive a pet in a shelter environment. Might be like an owner surrender. It might be transfer from a high kill shelter. From a rescue, it might be pulling them from the shelter, or again, owner surrenders or returns. How do you help that process?
So for the intake process, it's good news and slightly not great news. When we have someone that's surrendering an animal, we have created a questionnaire, which, by the way, needs to be discussed, and the questions need to be asked in a very compassionate and empathetic way. This is not judging this person for bringing their dog because they're, for whatever reason, that is what they need in their lives, for what, for their situation. But the more information that we can gather about that dog, the better equipped the shelter or rescue will be to provide that particular animal with not only what they need while they're in their care, but also provide them with the best opportunities for adoption with the right types of fits. When shelters and rescues pull, whether it's a stray, whether they pull from another organization, they grab a dog that is in a rescue that was potentially going to be euthanized, there's typically not the level of information.
No.
And it's hard because one thing that I talk to a lot of shelter and rescue organizations, and one thing that everybody is sort of pulling their hair out about is, how do we know? How do we know if this dog has separation anxiety if we don't have intake information from a previous guardian? And the answer is you don't.
Mm-mm.
Because separation anxiety looks identical to shelter stress, and it can also not be very apparent at all in an environment where our dog is very shut down and overwhelmed. So while in the shelter environment, even those dogs that you think, oh, I take them out for their, let's say, their walk, and they don't want to go back in the kennel and they just want to be with me, kind of, that could just be shelter stress.
Yeah.
And there's a big concern about labeling a dog with separation anxiety that doesn't have it. And there's also a big concern about labeling a dog that does have separation anxiety without, that,
Right.
that transparency. And so I really urge shelter and rescue organizations to refrain from diagnoses unless they really have historical information.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so that's the thing that I feel like is always missing in the rescue process is the questionnaire. So this is available to all rescues and shelters.
Yeah.
You provide the questionnaire. They don't have to make up the questionnaire. They just need to ask people to complete it.
Yes, and I recommend that it's sort of a conversation as opposed to please fill this out type of thing.
Got it.
It's a kindness that we need to afford people, even though we don't like dogs being relinquished because that worries us. But it's a kindness that many people need is our empathy and compassion. So
absolutely, and it's
that
at the end
available to download. That resource and all the others are available for free to download on our website. So
amazing. Yeah, and I think it's really important that we leave all judgment aside, because at the end of the day, it really is about setting that pet up for success. And if the person is there surrendering them, they obviously are not in the best place they can be. So knowing that information allows us to find a better solution for that pet, a better placement for that pet. So it's always like the same way when I go to my district meetings for my kids' public school, the goal is the kids. It's always about the kids. The bureaucracy, everything else, the feelings the adults feel, not important. It's about the kids, and in this case, it's about the pets. How does the shelter environment, I imagine it would exacerbate separation anxiety. How do you help shelters mitigate that, if it's even possible to do so?
Yeah, so it can exacerbate separation anxiety. We don't know for sure because we don't have enough numbers and research behind that. But anecdotally, from what we see, it can commonly exacerbate some of the separation-related behavior issues. Before fully answering this question, I want to make a huge sort of disclaimer in that I recognize that when we're talking about shelters and rescues, we're talking about organizations that could be one or maybe two people that are just renting it because they love that breed or they love the local community dogs or whatever, all the way up to, a behavior staff of 20 people. And a volunteer pool of several hundred, so not every suggestion is gonna necessarily work depending on the resources that the individual organization has. The very first suggestion for those that have the resources available would be to consider foster care. That, of course, would be wonderful for these dogs. And interestingly enough, it's often assumed that the foster needs to do the training for separation anxiety. While that wouldn't hurt, that doesn't generalize to the new home. And so if we have limited resources, I'd rather put those limited resources in getting other types of support that goes with the dog post-adoption. Outside of foster, though, there's some really great research. Lisa Gunter and a couple of other folks put the research together about just getting the dog, like hanging out in the office for a couple of hours with the shelter and rescue staff, getting an overnight with a volunteer, getting a long, day trip with a staff member or a volunteer, or those sorts of things. Continue to, it's not perfect, but these are difficult situations, right? And those continue to allow that dog to kind of reduce some of that stress, and that reduction in stress seems to be contributing to their resiliency to be able to handle the environment that they're in. Really important. So we just have to do the best we can do based on the resources that we have. And I love that you mentioned when you were thinking, I never thought of raising money, or raising funds for separation anxiety dogs, or any behavior for that matter. But there's a lot of things that even monetarily don't have to be included. I love when we have, whether it's a foster or an adopter of a dog with separation anxiety, creating an online calendar that volunteers and local pet sitters and dog walkers and etc. be like, I'll cover that 2 hours while you have to go to a doctor's appointment on Thursday.
Nice.
That is invaluable. And so there's a lot of things that we can offer that some, yes, are going to take, some financial resources like training, but others, getting people to help with that management would be amazing.
Absolutely. I love the idea of having volunteers sit with the dogs, because obviously we don't want to leave them with their fear. Like you said last time we spoke, you just lock them up with their panic and leave them on their own. That's not what we want. So having somebody to just support by just sitting there and watching TV or doom scrolling for 2 hours while the pet is like the pet's there, it's your break, it's your lunchtime, whatever. There's so many programs out there where we have people volunteer to walk dogs, but I haven't heard of anybody having volunteers to just sit with a dog. And not all dogs want to walk for a whole hour, so sitting with them would be nice too.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Most often these dogs just crave a human being hanging out with them. And I want to remind people too, yes, pet sitters charge and dog walkers charge. There's a lot of low cost and no cost resources too. College students that just want a nice, quiet, Wi-Fi enabled place to.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
And they're like, can I eat a sandwich out of your refrigerator? Make it, grab some things, or $10 for gas money or whatever.
Yeah.
You don't always have to. People think, I can't afford daycare and therefore I can't. No, daycare is fine, but it's just one of many options, and many of them are free or very low cost.
And honestly, knowing the pet sitters and dog walkers of the world as well as I do, many of them volunteer anyway. So it wouldn't be something that they would be unable to do, especially if they take a liking to a specific pet, be a part of that pet's adoption process. If they're available, if they're, maybe January, February, when they don't have a ton of people traveling, they can dedicate their time to that. So it's finding and using those resources, leveraging the connections that we have in the industry, in the city, in the town that we live. How do you support adopters? So I assume that because these shelters and rescues are connected with you, they know your resources, they're referring to you. Do you find that a lot of these adopters actually follow through and reach out?
They do. And I think that it's kind of two-pronged. A lot of the shelters and rescues that we work with know that we provide a lot of resources to adopters. And one of the things that we offer any shelter or rescue anywhere in the world, if they want to support an adopter that has a separation anxiety afflicted dog, we will give them a $100 discount on Mission Possible. Mission Possible is $199 regularly, which is lifetime access. We are in that platform every day. People can post questions, post comments. They can ask all sorts of stuff, and we respond to it 365 days a year. So people aren't alone. Adopters aren't alone. So we offer that discount to any shelter or rescue that wants to reach out to us,
Nice.
whether they ask whether they want the adopter to pay the $99 or the shelter wants to cover that. That's up to them. But so that's kind of one place that I think anybody from an affordability standpoint could probably start.
Absolutely. And it's one of those self-guided but also guided courses. So yes, you do it at your pace and you do it when you have the time, but you also have somebody to guide you, because this isn't, some training is black and white. This is not. There's a lot of gray and separation anxiety. So you want that support, which is amazing.
Yeah. And then other organizations are like, let's give this dog, 1 or more months of one-on-one training. And some of the adopters are like, I want to start out right. I'm just going to go right in and get one-on-one training. And that's awesome too. I have to say, as much as I really feel strongly about getting that one-on-one training so that we don't continue to misstep.
Right.
It's easy to misstep. The amount of success that we see through those dog guardians that go through Mission Possible is pretty astounding.
Yes.
And so I want to make sure that people know that, you might want to go through Mission Possible, and now you get, you a couple weeks in and you go, I have a question. Maybe I'll just do one quick ad hoc half an hour or something like that to ask some questions, or ask questions within the platform. We always answer them. But if it's really specific to their dog, their environment, we need to be able to look at that. And just it's one of those things where I feel like if I passed away tomorrow, I would know that there were a lot of people out there that would be able to continue to thrive with their dogs based on something that I've contributed in that.
That's amazing. That is really special. And I think the building of community for something like this is really important, because a lot of people have no idea what they're getting into. They hear separation anxiety. They're like, we can handle that. And then they see the behaviors. They become bigger because they mismanage it, not on purpose, but we don't know what we don't know. And then they're like, nobody in my family gets it. Nobody in my work understands why I can't go out after work because I don't have a sitter. Nobody gets it. And then they join something like, or they find their way to you, and then they join Mission Possible, and they see that they're not alone and that other people have similar experiences, even though it manifests differently. It's still a community that you can count on and maybe share those lows and those highs with, that really gets it.
And I can tell you, I've been a guardian of a dog that suffered with separation anxiety myself. This was 10 years after I had already been specializing in the behavior. But just having people that said, I know you can't meet us for dinner. Why don't we all come to your house and bring some takeout?
Yes.
Because they get it. Mm-hmm. As opposed to being like, you just can't, we're just going to exclude you, kind of thing. Like,
you're spoiling your dog. Just leave him. It's a dog. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So when it comes to education for volunteers or workers in the rescues and shelters, do you feel like there's a huge need for education? Do you find that depending on the funding of the shelter, maybe they have more education than others? Is it just drastically different depending on where you look? How have you found that kind of aspect of this? Because education is so important, especially from the top of the leadership in shelters and rescues.
Yeah, it is really quite varied. And I think those organizations that have someone on staff, or at least a volunteer, that have good behavior background are tend to have much more understanding.
Got it.
Um, it's it's a little shocking to me that there's a large component of organizations that are still like, put them in a crate and stuff a Kong and it'll be fine, you know. And shout out to Kong. I don't, no offense there. I just stuff a
No,
food toy.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
Uh,
yeah.
Shove them in a crate and they should be fine. And I want to get the message out there that I don't pay me. I will educate you. I want
Yeah.
you to know that you can help and that there is hope and that these dogs have tremendous ability to improve if we approach their training and behavior modification in the right way.
Okay, so how do you help the dogs? Because I imagine that, and I don't know, I've never spoken to anybody about separation anxiety in terms of rescues and shelter specifically, but is it a death sentence for some of these dogs to be diagnosed with separation anxiety? And obviously, if the shelters are gaining access to these resources, does that improve their outlook? A lot.
So I'll answer part two before I answer part one. Yes, and it does improve their outlook a lot when shelters and other rescue organizations have access to these resources and understand that there are ways to devote their internal resources, not always financially, sometimes not even at all
Right.
but devote some resources, time, volunteers, blah, 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 to getting this dog into the right home, including things like screening for the right adopter and counseling the adopter, because saying to an adopter, well, he doesn't like being left alone, is not enough. Not enough. Because 90% of them are going to say, oh, if I love him enough, he'll be fine, kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know?
No, it's fine. I work from home 3 days a week. It's cool. Yeah.
Don't roll out that often.
Yeah. They don't realize how often they're gone until they come home and their door has been gnawed to like pieces. Yes.
Exactly. So that education, I think, is so, so important. I'll tell you, years ago, there were some local organizations that it was an automatic euthanasia if a dog came in positive, knowing that the dog had some sort of separation related behavior problem or was relinquished for that reason. And then when we did this survey that we started in October, there's still a few people that filled out the survey. Some of them said we provide some support, we do this, we do that, but there were still a handful that said automatic euthanasia. And I really would like to get that education out there, because of course I can't say that this would be for any and every dog suffering from separation anxiety, but man, most of these dogs that have this particular behavior problem are the most amazing dogs that don't have a whole lot of, if any, other behavioral problems. And we'll just fix that whole separation anxiety pink elephant in the room, and then they're like the easiest, most incredible dogs you can ask for.
Yes, exactly. Yes. I mean, it's one of those things where we can't fault them for wanting us near them. We can't fault them for wanting to make sure that they're going to survive our next outing. We can't blame them for that. And it really comes from a place where they just want to be safe. They want to have stability. They want that loving home environment. That's what they want. So I'm happy to hear that it's changing. It breaks my heart to think that a dog with separation anxiety would be an automatic euthanasia. I understand that there are extreme cases where maybe they're a danger to themselves and others. Well, okay. So how can my audience learn more about everything that you offer, all of your expertise? How many dog trainers have you even educated at this point? Where can they find a dog trainer near them if they want to find somebody who's, certified by you?
Okay. Well, feel free, anybody whether you are a dog guardian, pet parent, whether you are a dog professional, a behavior consultant, a trainer, whether you're a vet, a veterinary behaviorist, a vet tech, just go to my website. There's a ton of free information there for anybody to use. The website is MalenaDeMartini.com. Should I spell it or will it be in the show notes?
I'll put it in the show notes and I will put it in the video so that everybody can jot
Oh,
it down.
thank you. That'd be great. And there are a number of ways that we can support individuals. Right now, I think I've sort of lost count, but it's over 250 certified separation anxiety trainers that have graduated my program. We are all over the world, and we do all of our work remotely, because guess what? If I show up at your house, that's not about leaving your dog alone. So everything we do is work with our clients remotely 5 days a week, typically, which is unheard of in our industry, but we do. And you can go to my website and search by location, meaning location from a time zone perspective, because we want people to be in
Great.
time zones.
Yes.
And also from a language perspective.
Perfect.
So if you have if you are not English speaking, there are a number of language opportunities of trainers and behavior consultants on the website. So you can search by a variety of different parameters.
Well, thank you so much for your time, for educating me and my audience. I love talking to you. So here's to you. Thank you for all you do for these beautiful dogs that just want a little extra attention.
Thank you as well. Cheers.
Cheers. I also want to propose a toast to my executive producer, Mark Winter. Thank you, Mark. And to our audience for joining us for these awesome conversations. I hope that you took as much from this as I did. It filled my heart to talk to you, Malena. Here's to a life covered in pet hair, because there's no better way to live. Cheers. To learn more about Covered in Pet Hair, please visit coveredinpethair.com or petliferadio.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.